Hello, Research Triangle High School sophomores, soon to be juniors. This is a short video giving you an overview of the Arab Spring. I'm Mr. Goldberg, and let's get started. So this is the result of a Google image search for the Arab Spring, and you've probably heard the term at least a few times, but I think it's easy to hear Arab Spring and not be sure quite what it refers to. So this is a map, and it's a pretty remarkable map actually, because the areas in black here, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt twice, and Yemen, have all had their governments overthrown. Syria, up here, is in the midst of a civil war, and there are protests and governmental changes in the blue areas over there. And you can hit pause and take a look at this map and see where there have been major protests and minor protests and related crises in Iran and Mali. And this has all been happening pretty much in a 1 to 2 year period, starting in December of 2010. And right here in Tunisia is where a man named Mohamed Bouazizi set himself on fire. And you can look up more details about why that was. He sort of became a symbol of the struggles that people in Tunisia had, the poor people with the government, and he just felt like he was not being respected and had no power to fight back with force, and so he decided to kill himself to become a symbol. And his symbol spread in Tunisia, as we'll see, and it led to an overthrow of the government. And then other big protests, Egypt, a country with about 80 million people, took down its leader, and the reference here to Mubarak, he was the leader of Egypt, a guy named Hosni Mubarak. And as you probably heard, and as we'll look at, in Syria, there's been a different result. People tried to protest, and the government has cracked down pretty severely there, and there have been massive protests. So the term Arab Spring a little oversimplifies what's going on in a very complex region with different histories, but suffice it to say that a lot of people taking their cue from this fruit vendor in Tunisia who burned himself to death, people are rising up saying we want more from our government. And this is just a Google News search for Arab Spring, and it's a contentious idea. The Afghan president recently contradicted President Obama's praise for the Arab Spring, looking at what's the role of a modern king in the Arab Spring. Jordan's King Abdullah II, can he liberalize his kingdom without being overthrown? And then here's a piece in The Economist looking, saying that the Arab Spring has turned into an Islamist winter. It's not as optimistic anymore. And again, it's in the news quite a bit. So we're going to be looking at it on April 24th. And this is an overview video, and it'll have some links to additional resources you might want to look at. So here's a quick definition of it. It's a series of anti-government protests, uprisings, and armed rebellions that spread across the Middle East in early 2011. But again, their purpose, relative success, and outcome are hotly disputed in Arab countries, among foreign observers, and between world powers who are looking to, whenever there's instability, people will try to assert their power in a region. And so why is it called the Arab Spring? Well, there was this uprising in Tunisia that spread to other places. Now, it's sort of weird because it started in December of 2010, and the events in Egypt happened in 2011, but spring is metaphorical here, and it means an awakening or a renewal. And you can hit pause and read this if you're interested in sort of where the name came from. And again, it's more complicated than the term Arab Spring might suggest. Egypt, Tunisia, and Yemen entered an uncertain transition period. Syria and Libya were drawn into civil conflict. Syria is still very much in a civil conflict, and Libya also has an uncertain future. And then wealthy monarchies in the Persian Gulf were largely unshaken by the events. And so some people have criticized Arab Spring for being inaccurate and simplistic, but it is a widely used term, and so just be aware that once you start talking about it, you want to break it down by country because it means different things in different places. These are a couple of symbols of where there have been protests. This is Tahrir Square in Egypt, and you can see what it looks like empty over here. And it was full with millions, literally millions of protesters for about 2 weeks. I need to look up the specifics, but they were there until the president, Hosni Mubarak, finally decided to resign. And this is a place called Pearl Roundabout in Bahrain. And it was such a symbol of the protests. You can see the protests here that the government ordered it looks like a little pearl on a pedestal here. That's why it's called that. And the government had it knocked down, and this is what it looks like today. It's just a big open traffic area. It was where cars would come in and go around it, as you can see here, and it looked nice at night, apparently, but the government did not want to be reminded of this symbol of people rising up, and so they have wiped it out. And Time Magazine has named the protester as its Person of the Year in 2012. So this was for what happened largely in 2011, and it's this idea that people can make a difference. Here's the Wikipedia definition of the Arab Spring. A revolutionary wave of demonstrations and protests, both nonviolent and violent, also riots and civil wars that began, as we said, in Tunisia and spread throughout countries of the Arab League and its surroundings. And again, some people have referred to the aftermath of the revolutions and civil wars as the Arab Winter, because it hasn't brought about quite as much democracy as folks had hoped it might initially. And events are still developing, so it's hard to, this is very much current events. It's hard to know exactly what the meaning of the Arab Spring is. And now we'll go back to that map we looked at in the beginning, and I encourage you to hit pause here and just try to get a sense of, okay, here's Tunisia, and here's Libya, and this is Egypt, and Syria is over here, and this is Bahrain over this way, and just get some sense of the region. It's probably not a region you've studied that much, but just getting familiar with some of the countries that are there might really help you for the Flex Day. And what we're hoping is that the Flex Day will spark an interest in the region and get you curious to learn more. So this is a pretty great timeline. I'll put the link to this timeline in the document that will accompany this video. But if you go up to this slider here and look at the different countries, the countries are all named down here alphabetically, you can see where stuff starts to happen. So this is Tunisia, and that's where things start. And then there's a lot of action here in Egypt, you can see. And then this red is when Mubarak decides to stand down and hand power to the military. Hopefully you can read over there. When I go over it, it disappears. But you get some sense of, okay, a lot of action there. Now we've got a lot of action here in Libya, and there's going to be a regime change there as well. And then we're back over into Syria, where the civil war has been going on. And you can click on any of these events. You can see here there's a lot happening in Yemen. And so you just pick one of them to click on, and you can read the articles that correspond to a lot of these events. And then you see Libya back in the news here, and Syria, and then more in Egypt. So I'll just scroll through it real quickly as we get into, that's the end of 2011. And that's a pretty good indication of why Time Magazine named the protester Person of the Year for 2011, because almost all this happened in 2011. The first event is the immolation or setting fire to himself of Mohammed Bouazizi, who was a vegetable salesperson. So this is a really neat resource, and I hope that you will learn a bit more about the Arab Spring for Flex Day. And so if you do want to do more research, here's a guide of where you can start. The way to get to this document is to visit bit.ly/flex2015. Has to be all capital letters or it won't work, but that will take you to this shared document with a bunch of resources in it. And here's the map that we looked at to start with. And this is that interactive timeline that I just showed you from The Guardian, where you can see the different countries and learn about what happened in different places. And this is a collection of some more resources. There's only 3 listed now, but as Flex Day gets closer, if there are more better resources to look at, I'll put those there. And then this is a copy of that map that we looked at in the video. So thanks for watching. And again, we look forward to working with you on April 24th. And to get to this document one more time, it's bit.ly/flex2015. Thanks.